Oh. Hello.
Hello. Am I appearing twice for you?
You are.
That's strange. Hold on one.
Okay. Oh, and I also need to do one other thing because this is be too easy otherwise. I'm going to start streaming on Facebook too. Nope. All right. Hopefully that'll do it. All right. Well, good evening, everybody, unless you are Charlotte, in which case it's good morning, because it's actually 10 o'clock in the morning in Australia at the moment. Welcome to this, our second installment of Must Read TV, the Skylark Bookshop Virtual Author Series. My name is Alex George, and I'm the owner of Skylark, which is an independent bookstore in downtown Columbia, Missouri. If you enjoyed this evening's presentation, please do go to the Skylark website and look at our events page, and please consider making Thursday nights and Must Read TV a regular part of your week for the next couple of months. I have been looking forward to this particular event for ages. I met this evening's author, Charlotte McConaghy, in Baltimore in January at the American Booksellers Association annual convention. And Charlotte and I are both published by Flatiron Books. And over the course of a few days, we got to know each other a little bit as we drove all over Baltimore in a variety of Ubers to attend several events together, telling booksellers about our respective novels. Having listened to Charlotte talk about her book, I came home and I read Migrations, and I fell completely in love with it. It's a stunning novel full of mystery and longing and sadness and just extraordinarily beautiful writing. And this evening's conversation is particularly special because I'm also thrilled to welcome Caroline Bleeke, Charlotte's editor, to discuss the novel with her. And there are three reasons for this. Firstly, author-editor conversations are always fascinating because you really get a chance to see how the sausage is made. You're listening to the two people who have had the most influence over the text. And speaking from my own experience, the author-editor collaboration is one of the most rewarding elements in publishing a book. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about how Charlotte and Caroline work together. Secondly, Caroline is also my editor, and so I know firsthand how brilliant she is. And thirdly, she's just a wonderful person who I'm always thrilled to see, even if it is on this occasion remotely. If you have a question for either Charlotte or Caroline, please write it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, or if you're watching on Facebook Live, please type it in the comments. If you enjoy this evening's conversation, it would be really tremendously helpful to us and will help us be able to put on more of these events if you purchase Charlotte's book from Skylark. And if you do that, we will send you a pristine first edition, complete with a book plate signed by Charlotte, but that is not all. So for those of you who attended last week's inaugural event with Byron Lane, you will already know about Skyku. These are haiku, written by our visiting authors expressly and explicitly and only for you Skylark customers. And we will be producing these as a highly limited edition on gorgeous cardstock. Each one is going to be signed and numbered by the author. I'm thrilled to tell you that Charlotte has very graciously agreed to write a haiku for us. So that will be one more thing to look forward to when you purchase your copy of Migrations from us. As before, we'll allocate these on a first-come, first-served basis. And so to reserve your copy, just drop us a line to mail@skylarkbookshop.com with your telephone number, and we'll give you a call tomorrow to take care of payment and shipping. All right, without further ado, I will hand it over to Charlotte and Caroline. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the evening.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Skylark. We are so excited to be here, and I'm thrilled to get to celebrate with Charlotte today. We've been working together for years at this point, and it's just amazing to finally be here and finally have the novel out in the world. So congratulations, Charlotte. So Migrations opens with these haunting lines. The animals are dying, soon we will be alone here. And with that, we are introduced to a world and to a woman on the brink of catastrophe. The planet has continued to warm, the wild has continued to disappear, and against this backdrop, our heroine, Franny Stone, sets herself an impossible task, which is to follow one of the last flocks of birds in the world on what might be their last migration from the Arctic to the Antarctic. Franny talks herself onto this fishing boat and sets off from Greenland, chasing the birds south. And as their journey progresses, the dark secrets of Franny's past, secrets that she's been keeping from the reader and from herself, begin to unravel, and we start to understand what she's really running toward and running from. Since Migration's published on Tuesday, it has gotten rave reviews, and I'm going to embarrass Charlotte by reading from a few of them. The New York Times Book Review calls it a first-rate work of climate fiction, as well as a clever reimagining of Moby Dick, a nervy and well-crafted novel that lingers long after its voyage is over. The LA Times calls it the novelistic equivalent of an energizing cold plunge. Elle calls it a tantalizingly beautiful epic. Vogue calls it suspenseful, atmospheric, and as much a mystery as an odyssey. And in what I think is now my favorite review, which just came in today from The Guardian, they write, it's an aching and poignant book, and one that's pressing in its timeliness. It's often devastating in its depictions of grief, especially the wider, harder to grasp grief of living in a world that has changed catastrophically. But it's also a book about love, about trying to understand and accept the creatureliness that exists within ourselves and what it means to be a human animal, that we might better accommodate our own wildness within the world. So congratulations, Charlotte. And can you read a little bit of the book for us to give us a taste of it?
Yes, of course. I haven't read that Guardian review. That's beautiful. I'm not the best at reading out loud, so I apologize if I stumble. I'm just going to read the first few pages. The animals are dying. Soon we will be alone here. Once, my husband found a colony of storm petrels on the rocky coast of the untamed Atlantic. The night he took me there, I didn't know they were some of the last of their kind. I knew only that they were fierce in their night caves and bold as they dove through moonlit waters. We stayed a time with them, and for those few dark hours we were able to pretend we were the same, as wild and free. Once, when the animals were going, really and truly, and not just in warnings of dark futures, but now, right now, in mass extinctions we could see and feel, I decided to follow a bird over an ocean. Maybe I was hoping it would lead me to where they'd all fled, all those of its kind, all the creatures we thought we'd killed. Maybe I thought I'd discover whatever cruel thing drove me to leave people and places and everything always. Or maybe I was just hoping the bird's final migration would show me a place to belong. Once it was birds who gave birth to a fiercer me. Greenland, nesting season. It's only luck that I'm watching when it happens. Her wing clips the hair-thin wire and the basket closes gently over her. I sit up straighter. She doesn't react at first, but she knows somehow that she is no longer free. The world around her has changed just a little or a lot. I approach slowly, reluctant to scare her. Wind screams, biting at my cheeks and nose. There are others of her kind all over the icy rocks and circling the air, but they're quick to avoid me. My boots crunch and I see a ruffle of her feathers, that hesitant first flap, the will I try to break free moment. The nest she's built with her mate is rudimentary, a scattering of grass and twigs wedged into a crevice in the rocks. She doesn't need it anymore. Her fledglings are already diving for their own food, but she returns to it like all mothers unable to let go. I stop breathing as my hand moves to lift the basket. She flaps only once, a sudden burst of defiance before my cold hand closes over her body and ceases her wings' movement. I have to be quick now, but I've been practicing and so I am, my fingers swiftly looping the band over her leg, shifting it over the joint to the upper stretch beneath her feathers. She makes a sound I know too well, one I make in my dreams most nights. I'm sorry, we're nearly there, nearly there. I start to tremble, but keep going. It's too late now. You have touched her, branded her, pressed your human self upon her. What a hateful thing. The plastic tightens firmly on her leg, keeping the tracker in place. It blinks once to tell me it's working. And just as I am about to let her go, she turns very still so that I can feel her heartbeat pounding inside my palm. It stops me, that pat, pat, pat. It's so fast and so fragile. Her beak is red like she's dipped it in blood. It turns her strong in my mind. I place her back in the nest and edge away, taking the cage with me. I want her to explode free. I want there to be fury in her wings, and there is. She's glorious as she surges, feet red to match her beak, a velvet cap of black, twin blades of a tail and those wings, the sharpness of their edges, the elegance. I watch her circle the air, trying to understand this new piece of her. The tracker doesn't hinder her. It's as small as my little fingernail and very lightweight, but she doesn't like it. She swoops at me suddenly, giving a shrill cry. I grin, thrilled, and duck to protect my face, but she doesn't swoop again. She returns to her nest and settles over it as though there is still an egg she must protect. For her, the last 5 minutes never happened. I've been out here now on my own for 6 days. My tent was blown into the sea last night as wind and rain lashed it from around my body. I've been pecked on the skull and hands more than a dozen times by birds who have been named the most protective in the sky. But I have 3 banded Arctic terns to show for my efforts, and veins filled with salt. I pause on the crest of the hill to look once more, and the wind calms a moment. The ice spreads wide and dazzling, edged by a black and white ocean and a distant grey horizon. Great shards of cerulean ice float languidly by, even now within the heart of summer, and dozens of Arctic terns fill the white of sky and earth, the last of them perhaps in the world. If I were capable of staying any place, it might be here, but the birds won't stay, and neither will I. That's probably enough.
Thank you, that's beautiful. So as we can see from those very first pages, birds are at the center of this novel, especially the Arctic tern. Can you tell us a little bit about why the tern? Why is that bird so important to you?
Yes. So I guess initially I wasn't sure which bird Franny would be following. I did a lot of research into birds, but as soon as I came across the Arctic tern, I knew that it was the one. It flies from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again every single year. And because they live about 30 years, over the course of their lifespans, they'll fly the equivalent distance up to the moon and back 3 times. And I just couldn't believe that it almost made me tear up because it just seems so far for this little creature to travel. And so this bird kind of became a metaphor for courage for me, and for the courage that Franny would need to make her journey. I think she really took heart from the distance these birds fly, even in such harsh conditions and getting harsher by the day.
And I remember you telling me a story about a flock of birds off the coast of Australia that were also inspirational to that story. Can you talk a little bit about that and just kind of the inspiration for the novel more generally?
Yeah, so that story, in Australia, there was a flock of seabirds who would migrate to a patch of our coast each year, and they'd arrive like clockwork to the day. They were so beautiful that people would travel from all over the place to watch their arrival. And then one year they just didn't show up, and they didn't come the next day or the next day. And in fact, they never showed up. And we don't know why, but scientists suspect it's because they couldn't find enough food to sustain them on their journey. It was such a long, difficult journey, and they perished along the way. And that's such a tragic story to me. And I couldn't stop thinking about how many animals there must be who've struggled like that because of our impact, and what their journeys look like. And yeah, that was a big part of why I wrote this book. In terms of where the idea came from, I guess it always felt like a book that I needed to write. It felt really necessary for me to engage with this climate crisis in a personal, intimate way, to write about something that's breaking my heart. But first, the first priority for me as a writer is to move a reader and to connect with them. And I think that happens when you write from an honest place, and from a character place. So Franny was the thing that came first for me. I went traveling. I wanted to explore Ireland and get to know the land my ancestors were from. I also went to Iceland, which is this incredible place, and I saw these grey-lag geese there, which was so beautiful, and they got me thinking about migratory birds and the incredible journeys that they take and the type of people that study these birds. And I think that's kind of how the idea of an ornithologist chasing a flock of birds came to be. And I guess as I got to know Franny and her story, I started to realize the kind of world I needed to place her in to really be able to tell her story with impact, and to, I guess, to safely engage with my own fear around the climate crisis. So that's how the environmental side of this book got slowly drawn in to sort of support her story. And the more I wrote about it, the more concerned I became.
Mm-hmm. Franny is the heart of the book so much, and that her voice, as everyone could see from those pages that you read, is so fierce and urgent and immediate. And she describes herself as a person whose life is a migration without a destination, until she's kind of spurred by the climate crisis to take action and to follow these birds. Can you talk a little bit more about Franny as a character and kind of how like parts of you in your life are in her, even if she's, you know, very much her own person?
Yeah, I can't really describe Franny as anything other than instinct for me. I feel like she sort of formed her own shape on the page and guided me through the book. She's migratory like the birds she loves. She's always moving. Movement for her is life, just like it is for them. And I think she's wilder than most people are. She doesn't really subscribe to the same values, career ambition, desire for wealth or stability. She moves through the world and her life led by instinct, which definitely I think makes her very creaturely. And I think I sort of poured all the things I wish I could be more of into her. She's brave and earthy, and she's so connected to nature. She doesn't take shit from people. But on the flip side of that, she's also very much a lost soul. I moved around a lot as a kid. We were kind of jumping from place to place, lived in a whole lot of different houses, 21 by the age of 21. And so I guess I know a little bit about what it feels like to be unsure where you belong. And that is certainly something that drives Franny. She's searching for home, family, belonging. But, you know, it's her drive to always be leaving that makes it really hard for her to have those things. And we see that manifested most clearly in her very passionate but difficult relationship with her husband, Niall.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about that, because this, in addition to being so many other things, this is a kind of epic love story and a star-crossed love story. And tell us a little bit about who Niall is and what their relationship is like.
So Niall is a professor of ornithology in Galway, and Franny and he meet when she's kind of auditing his class, even though she's not enrolled. She is cleaning the university at the time, but she kind of sneaks in and goes to his lectures because she just loves birds so much, and she's very inspired by his passion and his knowledge. And they have this really intense, fast, passionate relationship that sort of seems a bit out of control. But the struggle, I mean, it's very, very loving, but the struggle for them is that she has this drive to kind of leave and wander and search, and so she's always leaving him behind. And there's a line in the book that she says, it's not fair to be a creature who's able to love but unable to stay. And I think it's kind of her love for him that inspires her to, I guess, look at the birds in a different light. Or he teaches her that she's able to study the things she loves without taking the magic from them.
Mm-hmm. And Franny also comes to love the other crew members on the Saghani, which is the ship that she talks herself onto that takes her on this epic journey from Greenland to Antarctica. And I think a lot of readers, myself included, really fell in love with the crew. And it's this sort of eccentric, salty bunch of people. And as I said in my opening, several reviewers have compared the novel to Moby Dick, in part because of that. And you very bravely admitted to me having never read Moby Dick, which we can forgive because you're Australian. But I'd love to hear if there were other stories from the sea that inspired you, if there are other writers who, you know, write about the sea, write about birds and the wild, that you felt your book was sort of in conversation with as you were going along, or maybe it's more like folk stories and, you know, the selkies that play a role in the novel.
Yeah, well, so my secret shame is out. I don't tell people that I haven't read Moby Dick, and you don't have to let me off the hook because I'm Australian. We definitely have Moby Dick here. There's no excuse. So I think my sea stories inspiration, as you mentioned, came from a love of mythology, and in particular the Irish myth of the Selkie. A Selkie is a person who, or in the stories I love, she's a seal that can shed her seal skin to become a woman. And she can live on land and fall in love and have children. But the tragedy of the Selkie woman is that she's always bound to the sea, and never happy unless she can return to it. So, I mean, it's very obvious now, looking back, that really informed Franny's character. I don't think I was aware of it at the time, but it definitely did. And, you know, informed her love of the ocean. In terms of, well, I mean, I loved The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway. That was that kind of being stuck at sea, and the same with Love in the Time of Cholera, that idea of choosing to be out there and not being able to come back in. But I also, in terms of nature writing, I always come back to Mary Oliver. Throughout writing this book, every time I'd get stuck or feel like I didn't know what I was doing, what I was writing towards or about, and there were a lot of those times, it happened often, I would stop and go and sit in my backyard and read a book of Mary Oliver poetry and cry and be inspired again. She just writes so beautifully about our connection to nature and how it feeds us. It's like she can kind of see the secrets of the universe in the feathers of bird wing, or the secrets of us and who we are. I also love Jim Crumley. He's a Scottish nature writer. And I loved The Overstory by Richard Powers. Yeah.
I want to go read some Mary Oliver now.
She's amazing.
Have a beautiful allusion to her in the novel that people will find in the pages. I think one thing that I've appreciated more in the last 6 months than I had before, of all the many times I've read this book, which is that you take us all over the world and transport us to all of these far-flung places, from Greenland, where the novel begins, to Nova Scotia, Ireland, the outback, all the way down to Antarctica. And I think, you know, when we're all kind of confined to our quarantine spaces, that the expansiveness of that is really such a gift. And can you talk to us a little bit about like the research that you did in evoking those places, the travel that you did, how you made those places come so alive on the page?
Yeah, well, I guess starting with Galway, which is where Franny's hometown is, and she spends most of her life there. That's definitely a place that I really love, and I would love to spend more time there. So I went traveling around Ireland, and there's a scene in the book where she is looking for her relations, and she comes across this lovely family, and they play music for her in their kitchen, and that was a true story that happened to me when I was over there searching for roots and family. So that was amazing. That was a really rich moment that I wanted to include in the book. I grew up on the south coast of New South Wales in Australia, and so that I also wanted to have moments of Franny growing up there, and a lot of the ice stuff came from Iceland, even though Iceland is not in the book, but I think it gave me that sense of the sound of huge cracking icebergs, which is just like nothing you'll ever hear or experience. But the rest was research. I just really read and read and read, and I watched things, and I tried to find first-person accounts of what these places are like. And I think that that's a really wonderful thing about the age that we live in. You know, there's so much information that we have access to that it really does feel like you can travel when you can't. And that's the kind of thrill of a great book, I think.
Agreed. Well, I thought also maybe we could talk a little bit about our relationship and how the book, we can give people that sort of behind the scenes peek.
Yes.
And, you know, the beginning of the editorial relationship is when an agent emails an editor a manuscript. And so the editor, you know, literally opens the Word document attachment and gets that thrill of reading something for the first time. And, you know, when your agent Sharon sent me Migrations, I think it was 2.5 years ago now.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Especially exciting because I had never heard of you before. I'd never read anything by you. This is your first book to be published in the US. It's your first adult novel. You know, I didn't recognize your name, but as soon as I started reading those pages, I felt like I knew Franny, and I was so instantly enthralled by her. And I think that's kind of my favorite part of being an editor still, even now, just the thrill of discovering a brilliant new book, and then having the chance to have a conversation with the author right away. And, you know, we're all readers before we're editors. And so there's still like that inner reader within me that thrills at the idea that I get to talk to a writer whose book I love. And, you know, we had a conversation like that very early on before I bought the book. But I'm so curious what those kind of early moments in the process were like for you, and how, you know, in the lead up before I got the book, kind of how you were working on it, what your process was.
Yeah, that conversation that we had was so thrilling. Oh my God, I was so nervous. But you were so lovely. And I just knew instantly that you were the right editor for the book. And so I was really, really hoping that, you know, you got it through sales and were able to make an offer. It was, so I got my agent with a different manuscript, which I wrote as a sort of a weird little, I don't really know what it was, to be honest. It wasn't ready to be published. And she was really wonderful about kind of saying like, well, what else do you have? Like, I'll rep you, but do you have another book in mind? I said, well, I've sort of been thinking about this thing. I don't really know what it is. And she said, well, just go away and write it. And that took about 2 years. And then when I finally got it to her, she kind of started that process of sending it out to editors. And we were just so lucky that it found a home with you. I honestly couldn't be happier. I could not be more thrilled how it happened. Just so lucky. But yeah, all the start of that was very kind of crazy and nerve-wracking.
And I think people are probably getting a sense of how slow moving publishing is, that, you know, you have to write the book, then you have to send it out. And then we have our long editorial process. And when, you know, a lot of the editing, especially when we're on different continents, happens in the manuscript itself, you know, in track changes, through editorial letters, through phone calls and video calls. And, you know, we went through a lot of rounds. You were very, very patient with me, you know, sending you an email at midnight that one word wasn't quite right. And I think as, you know, as we work together for a longer period of time, you start to kind of build that trust that, you know, we can go back and forth about, you know, the syntax of a single sentence, you know, have like a 5-comment thread about a word or, you know, something that a character says. Like, I think that kind of editing is so much fun when it's just really in the weeds. And, you know, we also, at the beginning, and going back to like the very first call, even before you decided to go with Flatiron, having these kind of larger structural conversations about, you know, the way that the novel ended, certain parts of the world building I know that we worked on together, pulling out certain characters and making them a bit richer. And, you know, you kind of have that macro and that micro editing going on simultaneously where you're doing that kind of bigger structural stuff in addition to the smaller notes.
Yeah, it's a really amazing process, just to have someone engage with you on your work in such an intimate, intense way. Like it's kind of it's an honor, you know, to have someone who's as clever and insightful as you are to kind of go, I've got these fresh eyes, I can see what this needs. It's exciting. You know, you suddenly, it's like a light's shone on it all and you can kind of see what needs to happen. And I think 99% of your edits, I was like, yes, great. And there might have been 1% where I was like, but that's normal, you know, that's always going to happen. It's that the editing process has, you know, with you has just made it 1,000 times stronger than it ever was.
Yeah, it's so much fun that there is that kind of collaborative element to it. But, you know, as an editor, it's such a joy to have a book come in that is already so good and so strong. And, you know, you always had this incredible voice. You always had these amazing transporting scenes, and the bones were there, and they were incredibly strong and solid. And it was really just, you know, kind of the more superficial line editing that we were working on for migrations. And, you know, I think this might come as a bit of a shock to people. It definitely feels shocking to me that you managed to do this, but in addition to launching migrations, you've also been working on your next book, which we sent to our copy editors on Migrations' pub day. So that is an incredible feat. But that was a really amazing editorial experience for me as well, because I was involved from an even earlier stage. You know, like you were working on that novel from the very beginning, that, you know, we were already working together when you started it. And so I got to see, you know, a full manuscript, but one that was not quite as complete and polished as Migrations had been when it crossed my desk. And that was so much fun for me to really, you know, kind of be in it, like to kind of see you develop it even more fully. And
yeah, it was a real first draft, like a vomit draft, which I was very nervous about sending you. And it was also a lot faster, the writing process for this one, because I obviously spent a few years on Migrations, and this one was 1 year from the time I started writing it to submission, which, you know, is a solid, good amount of time to be able to write a manuscript, but it definitely did feel a lot faster, and I guess a bit less cooked. So it needed you.
I think it also probably helped that we had established this level of trust that you know, that you felt like you could hand it over even if it wasn't absolutely perfect already.
Yeah, I kind of trusted that you would see what it needed to be.
Well, you can, if you want to kind of turn the, I feel like I've been putting you on the spot all night. So if you have any questions for me about sort of real matters.
Well, you kind of just like talked about it all, which was so lovely. I was going to ask you about just how you would approach the actual editing of a book and what kind of things you like, are there pitfalls and that you need to sort of avoid or watch out for, or just how do you kind of go about taking on something that big?
Mm-hmm. The way that I always look at an edit is that as an editor, you have to understand what the author is trying to do with a book. Like, you can never go into a book wanting it to be something else. And I've definitely read submissions where I was like, I really wish that the author had made this decision in terms of the structure, but I know that would make it a totally different kind of book. And so I think, having that synchronicity between the author and the editor, where even if I'm asking the author to do a lot of work and we're really going to be digging in and, doing those like structural and microscopic edits that we were talking about before, that it's all in line with the author's original vision, and that there isn't, that I'm not trying to impose something totally different that I think the book should be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think that, it's, in that sense, it's great that there are so many editors out there and so many different publishing houses, and, it's just really beautiful when you find that match, where you have that editorial connection and feel like you are really going to be able to help the author achieve what they want to achieve on the page.
Yeah. It's very special.
Yeah, like it's just, it's such a special feeling, to read something and just have it kind of click for you and recognize right away how special it is. Well, I think it's time to turn it over to some reader questions. Let me just see. Here's one. I kept thinking of Station 11 as I listened to the audio of this book. Have you read it, or which authors or books have influenced your writing? It's a great one.
I have read it. I loved it. I hadn't read it until after I wrote Migrations, and there was quite a few comments coming in saying, it's really like Station 11. So I was like, oh God, I have to read this book, and it's so great. I'm really happy with the comparison. I think it must be that slight element of speculative kind of looking at what could happen to the world and the ways in which people have to sort of survive those terrible things. In terms of other books, it's a really hard question. I'm not sure that I don't consciously sort of read and go, oh great, this is influencing me, but I think it's a rich tapestry of everything that I read and see and listen to is definitely kind of fueling my own work. As I said before, Mary Oliver is a big influence. She's poetry. I really like Daisy Johnson's novel Everything Under. I'm really looking forward to her next book, Sisters. She's got really gorgeous prose. And I think when you read something that's so beautifully written, it really lifts your own work as well. And whereas if you kind of go, oh, I'm just going to read something, I don't know, maybe a bit trashy, your writing goes way down. So it was definitely important for me to be kind of reading books that I felt were sort of aspirational.
Mm-hmm. This is sort of related to the question about Station 11, but Migrations, I wouldn't describe it as dystopian quite, but it is set in this near future in which climate change has continued to progress. And, it's it's a world that's becoming more and more realistic the more months pass. But could you talk a little bit about your decision to set it in that near future, but a world that still feels very recognizably ours? It's not set in the wake of a new kind of disaster. It's a disaster that we are well on our way to creating.
Yeah. So that the setting kind of came when I was doing my research, and I read this statistic that in the last 50 years alone, humans have killed over 60% of our wild animals. And that just horrified me, and the numbers getting worse. And so I think I was immediately kind of propelled into that future, imagining how it would feel to be alone here, and how lonely that would be, and how terrible. And so that definitely became the setting for this book. But as you said, I didn't want it to be too dystopian in a sense of looking at the physical impacts of the loss of animals. I didn't want to look at how it would affect us and our survival. Instead, I kind of wanted to look at how it would feel on an emotional, existential level. And I think that that's a bit of a pushback on that idea that humans are the center of everything, and that we're the only things that matter, because we're really not. And so I wanted to sort of explore the idea of love of animals purely for their right to exist, not because of how they serve us. I'm really hoping that this future does not come to pass.
So to switch gears, I love this question. Can you give us an example of something you did disagree on and tell us how you resolved it?
Maybe the ending?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. I can tell, yeah.
Well, we don't want to give away what the ending is.
We don't want to there's an epilogue.
Yeah. And Carolyn didn't want me to keep the epilogue, but I was determined to save it.
You were determined, and I'm so glad you did.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I think it was one of those things where, like the way that you justified it, I think you said that your mom told you that she didn't cry reading it until she got to the epilogue. And I think, I think that the ending of the novel, which I'm not going to give away, but the ending of the novel before the epilogue is so, it's so beautiful. And to me, it had this kind of perfect quality to it that felt like a very natural ending, but it's also unsatisfying in certain ways. And I think I had just spent so much time in the world of the novel, and I knew what happened in the epilogue, having read it. And I think I sort of lost sight of what that first experience of reading the novel all the way through was like. And,
yeah,
like the importance of
closure.
Yeah, exactly. Even though like the even the epilogue is still has a kind of aura of mystery to it, but it definitely gives some of that closure, which
yeah. And I remember also, I mean, you were so right that the end of the book is really powerful, but the reason for me that I wanted to keep in that epilogue was a thematic reason as well. I remember I had to really dig down into why I was so attached to this, because there's lots of stuff that I don't mind cutting. If I'm getting it from all sides, I'm happy to cut it. But this one it just felt like, because I'd started writing this book and it was about family and connection and what you do for family and for love, I wanted to just circle back and end on that theme, rather than ending on the more epic quest environmental side of things, bird side of things, I guess. So, I mean, they're equally, the book's about both of them, of course, but yeah, I think it was that theme that I wanted to circle back and finish on.
Yeah, and tying into that, it's a book that is incredibly dark for all of the reasons that we've been discussing. You know, it's this window into a future that we hope we won't get to, a future in which so much of the wild has disappeared, so many animals have gone extinct. But the novel never gives way to despair. It always has hope at its core. And I think that is something that so many readers, myself included, really responded to, that there is still hope for this world and for these characters, and that Franny, in some ways, her entire quest is this kind of hopeful journey, and the terns themselves are so, just the idea of this tiny little bird flying all the way across the world is such a hopeful thing.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the importance of that for you, and why it was so important to kind of keep the hope alive, even as you were writing about a climate crisis that can feel hopeless at times.
Yeah, that was certainly the whole point of the book for me. You know, it depicts this grim future, but it hasn't happened yet. We're not at that point. I think Franny in some ways is like us, like humanity. She's lost hope and she's embraced self-destruction. But by reconnecting with the people around her and the natural world that she loves so much, she finds the courage to hope again. And I definitely think that that's something that we all need to do, because hope is energizing. It gives us the energy we'll need to make a change and to fight for the things that we don't want to lose. It also shifts our perspective. It lets us see all the good things, our own ability to be nurturing and kind and generous. And those are the things that matter more than anything. We can be nurturing to each other and also to this planet. So yeah, I wanted to focus on that for her. Her internal, external journeys just had to reflect each other, and she had to kind of forgive herself for the losses in her life.
This is kind of related to that. What do you hope readers tell their friends about the book? Have you seen anyone out and about reading your book? Might be hard in the pandemic. But I love that question. Like, what, I mean, I think you've already sort of answered it, but is there anything else to add to what you hope readers will say when they go and shout about your book up from the rooftops?
Yeah. Well, I just really hope they say that they've been moved by it, or that it's helped them to feel less lonely, maybe, less despairing. It's very easy to become apathetic and with the difficulties at the moment. And the whole point of writing a book for me is to connect with readers and to make them feel less alone, to make them feel anything at all, to move them. So yeah, that would definitely be my hope. I haven't seen anyone reading it yet because I've been stuck at home. It's definitely hard to get out, and people are not just kind of sitting on benches reading books anymore, unfortunately. But I have been getting lots of little lovely notes from people who've read it, and yeah, I think that really means a lot to me. It's incredibly moving.
Yeah, I think seeing, having social media now and having this amazing community, especially on Instagram, where there's just so many people posting all the time about the books they love. I think that, even if it's not quite the same as seeing someone, on the train or on the it's still nice to get that kind of immediate reader interaction and feedback.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. Let's see. This is a good one. How is writing adult fiction different to writing YA? So as I had said before, you've been writing for years and years, even though this is your kind of first adult literary novel. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your sci-fi fantasy series and how the experience of writing those books informed migrations, even as it's such a different kind of genre.
Yeah, so I grew up writing fantasy and sci-fi because those are the books that I read. That was what I read. And I do think that you should write what you read, because you should love what you're writing. And so that was what I started out. And I was very young. I was 14 when I first started my first book. And so I guess really what changes in the writing is just you. You change and you grow and you hone your craft and improve, hopefully. In terms of the differences, I guess writing fantasy and sci-fi is you've really got to focus on the plot driving the story, but it has to feed the characters in the same way that you would in any genre. I guess it's a high stakes thing. Like, you get really high stakes when you're writing genre fiction, and that's something that I wanted to bring over into my literary fiction. And so I guess that's I mean, I think I always wind up writing women on quests no matter what genre I write in, and also for what age group. That to me didn't change a lot. I think I was younger when I was writing YA, so I was writing about things that were important to me then. I'm a bit older now. As I write adult fiction, I'm writing about the things that are important to me now. I wouldn't put much distinction between the age groups or the genres. I think you always just need to write the book that you need to write at that time, the book that you want to read. So that's what I try and do.
Mm-hmm. Something that I really love about the book is that you have this gorgeous heightened language and these, kind of exquisite set pieces and descriptions of nature and of birds, but it's also an incredibly propulsive story. Like, you're just so good at plot and at mystery, and there is a mystery at the heart of the book that kind of propels everything forward, and you do this kind of masterful movement back and forth in time, and it's just structurally so ambitious. And I think writing those previous novels that were more plotty really kind of taught you how to do that, and so it just feels so natural in Migrations that you were able to tell a propulsive story in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it definitely prepared me for pacing and tension, and also the non-linear structure. So it's told in the two timelines. That was something that I'd experimented before within my science fiction series. So it was definitely more familiar to me in this book. And I guess it comes down to the more you practice things, the better you become at them. And because I've been writing for so long, and I do have this kind of back catalogue of stuff that's really different. All the same, it's meant that I've practiced those, I guess, craft techniques. And in this book, the dual timelines they just really help to create that tension and that uncertainty, and you can use it to show the transformation in a character really well. And you can create these builds towards reveals of information that result in really amazing catharsis for the reader. So I think I was also just a bit too bored by the thought of writing one POV with one timeline. I don't know. It wasn't exciting enough for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is kind of a related question, and also one that we can give another little sneak peek behind the curtain about. But the question is, how did you decide to write the novel in the first person, and did you always know that you would write from the protagonist's perspective?
Oh, yes. Good. Yeah, good point. I forgot about that. So, yes, it always was in first person, but in the very first draft, there was a few chapters that actually cut away and explore Niall's point of view, and he's the husband, he's Franny's husband. And one of Carolyn's major editorials was that actually it's cutting away to his POV is taking us out of the intimacy and intensity of being with Franny on this journey. Is that, am I right in saying that's kind of where it came from?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like we should release those as like a bonus chapter because they were and it was so amazing to see Franny from the perspective of someone who loved her so deeply because she has so much trouble loving herself. And so I thought it was so beautiful to kind of see him fall in love with her and to get it from his perspective. But the novel feels so much, our journey with her and her kind of opening up to us and she's keeping all of these secrets, she's like keeping them from herself and also from us. And I think the journey for the reader is so much like understanding who she really is. And to me, it just felt, like those sections took away from that. And I just found myself like itching to get back to Franny's voice.
Yeah, and you were completely right. I mean, I think if anything, those chapters were probably, writing experiments for me to be able to understand Niall, and potentially should never have gone into the book. But I think I was attached to them because they just shed so much light on him and their love story. But yeah, it was absolutely the right decision to take them out.
They can exist in their lovely file on my computer. And
maybe
we'll get to
maybe I'll do a Midnight Sun and write the whole book from his point of view.
Perfect. Let me see. Anything else has come through? There's another one that you've already sort of answered. What books have you read lately that you've loved? Well, I guess I could take that one. And tell people a tiny bit about your new book, which I have very much in my head. It's going to be coming out next summer. So once everybody reads and falls wildly in love with migrations, they'll have Creatures All to look forward to, which is your next book. And it's set in Scotland, and it's about another brilliant young scientist who spends her life reintroducing wolves into the wild. And she's done this, in Alaska, and now she's come to Scotland. And I think it has, I don't want to say too much about it quite yet, but hopefully that is a sufficient teaser for people to look forward to. And it seems sort of crazy to even be asking this, but I'm hopeful that you have many more ideas, for future novels. But maybe a question to end on is kind of, I don't even know if you'll have an answer to this, but how do you find the seed of a book? Like, I'm sure you have so many ideas that could potentially become books, but how do you kind of know when you've stumbled across something that that can really kind of flower into a full novel? Like, do you have, maybe you've had ideas, that just kind of need time to marinate and then will ultimately.
Yeah. It's definitely, if something comes to you that really feels like you and feels like a space that you just want to be in, then that's definitely something to sit with. And sometimes it takes a long time. I've got an idea at the moment that I want to be my next book. And I have a sense of what I want it, the world that I want it to be about and the characters, but I haven't quite cracked the actual mechanics of the story. So that's been really sitting with me, but I know I can feel that this is the right story to be told. I just haven't got to the point where I can start writing it yet. But they come from, a lot of my ideas come from reading interesting articles, or, I mean, that's how Creatures All came about, because I was reading about the trembling giant in America, this incredible organism, which is a forest, but it's all the one tree that are connected, all the identical shoots of this one organism makes up a forest, and it's the oldest living organism on the planet. It's a million years old, and it's dying because of human impact. So there's obviously a theme that I come back to, which is nature, human impact on nature, but also the healing power of nature. And I think there'll be something similar about this very new idea that I'm turning over in my mind, but it also came from reading a really interesting article about seed banks, of all things, and that idea of what we try to save in the, to fight this tide of environmental crisis.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we sign off, this is your pub week. We're now on day 3 of having migration out in the world, and your book sold in 20 countries and counting. So in addition to being in the US, it's going to be published all over the world. So you're going to have many more pub days to come. But I think one thing that's really special is that it came out in Australia the same day that it came out in the US. So, even if we're all kind of sheltering in place, at least in Sydney, people could buy the book and get it. And so I think that made me really happy that there was that dual pub day. But tell us a little bit about how you've been spending this week and how you kind of marked the moment, on your actual pub day.
Well, I went out roaming around Sydney because I decided that I really needed to get some animals into my life. So I wanted to go and sort of see what I could spot, see what wildlife I could spot. And I found all these beautiful birds, swans, geese, cormorants. I saw fish and turtles and eels. It was actually really lovely. And it felt like a really apt way to spend that day. And I also went to bookshops to try and spot the book in the wild as well. Oh, somebody's just asked if there were flying foxes. I didn't see any of those. There's lots of bats in Sydney, so I'm constantly seeing bats.
Well, thank you so much for celebrating with all of us, Charlotte. Thank you for writing this amazing novel. Thank you, Alex and Skylark, for hosting us. And I hope that everybody tuning in will buy a copy from Skylark and get Charlotte's amazing haiku, which I am only just hearing about now. And obviously I need this in my life as well. So
I haven't written it yet.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. It's been lovely to chat. Thank you, Carolyn.
Take care.